My dad is a Holocaust survivor. When I was little, he used to comfort me whenever something went wrong. We weren't as close anymore, especially since my mom took her own life. My dad was extremely stingy. He would do whatever he could to save up every single cent possible. This affected people around him, like his new wife Mala. However, I had always been really interested about all the things he had to go through. I started visiting him so he could tell me everything. This is his story.
When I was young, I used to live in Częstochowa, Poland. I worked in the textile industry. I had a girlfriend, Lucia Greenberg. When I went to visit my parents in Sosnowiec, another Polish city, I met the most intelligent woman ever, Ania Silverberg, your mom. I fell in love with her, and we soon moved to her parents' house. They were always very nice and generous with me. They also worked in the textile industry. They had one of the biggest factories in the whole country, and they were quite wealthy. Her dad gave me the money to open my own factory. In 1937, your brother, Richie, was born. Your mother had always been a very nervous and fragile person. At one point, she lost her will to live, so I took her to a sanatorium. After a while, she felt better. It was 1938, and on our way there, we could see the first signs of the Nazi occupation in Poland. They started hanging anti-Semitic propaganda all over the country. We just hoped that a war wouldn't start, but our worst fears came true. In 1939, the war came, and I was one of the first soldiers to be in the front line. After some days of training, we went into the battlefield. I was laying on the ground. I could just hear gunshots all over the place, and I even killed a man. After hours of fighting, we lost, and the Germans took us as prisoners. We were taken to Germany, to a war camp where they separated the Polish soldiers from the Jews. I was so cold and hungry. When I saw that they were offering to get us out of there to work in some labor assignments, I volunteered. In my new destination, we had to use shovels and picks and work for hours to even the terrain. It was extremely exhausting, but at least we weren't starving anymore. After some time, we were able to catch a train home. However, while being in the camp, the Germans had occupied half of the country, including my city, so we were taken to a provisional camp in the unoccupied part, the Protectorate. Nevertheless, we were able to bribe the guards, and I was able to get to my parents' house pretending I wasn't a Jew. From there, I could get back to Sosnowiec.
At first, everything looked the same as when I had left, but this started to change. All Jewish shops were closed, including my factory. We were given coupons in order to get food. Luckily, thanks to Anya's dad contacts and money, he could live in good conditions for a longer time. I started winning money in the black market selling fabrics. It wasn't safe, but it was the only way to do it. In 1941, things started to get worse. The Nazis relocated all the Jews in the poorest neighborhood of the city. One day, they convened all the Jews in the city. Everyone who didn't have work papers, were old, or had a lot of children never got back. They were more than 10,000. This included my dad, my sister, and her children. In 1943, they relocated us again. This time, all the Jews in the city, which were less and less every day, had to move to the ghetto. My family was able to get a little house. One day, a family friend, Persis, arrived. He was the most important Jew in his town. He offered to take with him part of the family, including Rishu. I had to convince Anya, because it was the best for them. However, none of them survived. The Nazis decided to send all the Jews in that ghetto to Auschwitz. Tosha, Anya's sister, who had gone there with the children, poisoned the kids and herself as she decided that would be much better than a concentration camp. The Germans were killing everyone without papers, which were more and more people every day. Due to that, I built a secret bunker under our home. When the Germans came, they couldn't find us. We had to relocate again to a smaller apartment, where I built another bunker. One day, while we were hiding, a man entered asking for help. We decided to help him, and we bribed him so he wouldn't tell the officers. Nevertheless, he revealed our hideaway, and we were taken to another place with the rest of the Jews, which at this point were about 200. Shortly after that, Anya's dad was taken away too. He was a millionaire, but not even money could save him. By the end of 1943, almost everyone from Srodula had been taken to Auschwitz. My cousin Milok took me to a shoe factory. There was a huge pile of shoes. They had built a hiding place. Anya, my niece, and I hid there for some time. There wasn't any food left in the ghetto, so we had to eat wood from the floor. Anya and I stayed until I was sure the Germans had left.
We didn't have any place to go, so we just kept walking. We got to Janina's house, with Chio's babysitter. She let us hide in the barn for some time, but it wasn't safe to stay there. Even if Anja was terrified about it, I went out to find some food and maybe a better place to stay. I found a woman hiding in a backyard. She was selling food. I paid her with some jewelry I still had. Every day I got out in order to look for food. She always sold it to me. I was told to ask Mrs. Kauka to let us hide in her house. She indeed let us stay in her barn. It wasn't bad for the summer, but Anja would freeze in the winter. Mrs. Motonowa, the woman who sold me food, wanted to help us. One night she guided us to her house. I paid her very well, and she was very pleased to have us there. When Mrs. Motonova's husband came back from his job, we had to hide in the storage room until he left. It was full of rats, and we didn't get much food, as Mrs. Motonova couldn't come much, so no one would be suspicious about it. I started meeting with some other youths to prepare an escape plan. One of them knew some people who could take us to Hungary. It was very expensive, but at that time youths lived much better there. Angie refused to go. She said it was all a trap. I finally convinced her. We got into a train which would take us to Hungary. At a given moment it stopped, and some German soldiers took all of us to prison. We were soon transferred to Auschwitz. It was 1944 when we arrived. They made us go naked and they shaved our heads. We were given a pyjama and a number. Mine was 17,513. A man in my barrack said that due to the number I was given, it meant I was going to get out of there. That gave me a little hope. There was a supervisor there. He treated us horribly, even if he was a prisoner too. He once asked who spoke English and Polish. I raised my hand. I was the only one who spoke both languages fluently, so he chose me as his teacher. I was lucky as from then on. He gave me special privileges such as brand new shoes and much more food than the rest in exchange of my teachings. He even let me hide in his place when the Germans took prisoners. When the moment came, he sent me to a quarantine block, where I could live a bit better, and I could work instead of being killed.
I worked as a blacksmith, and my boss, Ida, was a Russian Jew who didn't like me very much. I had to give him cheese so he wouldn't hurt me, but he thought it wasn't enough. In Auschwitz, we lived in really harsh conditions. We were barely fed, and when they did give us food, it was either in bad shape or they had it prepared inedible on purpose. In the meantime, Anja was in Birkenau, Auschwitz, where people were killed sooner. Nevertheless, a Hungarian woman called Nancy helped me contact Anja. That's how I knew she was still alive. It made me feel incredibly relieved. I was able to talk to Anja on some occasions, but volunteered to go to Birkenau, since they had to send some soldiers over there. In the camp, they carried out selections, in which they selected the unhealthy ones to be killed. This wasn't a problem for me, as I was able to remain strong. Then I started working as a shoemaker, and the treat I was given changed considerably. I sent a letter to Anja, letting her know about my new job. She told one of the guards I could fix his frayed boots in Auschwitz, and so I did. From then on, Anja started being treated differently too. In October 1944, thousands of women arrived, including Anja. My conditions had aggravated because my new job required a quite big physical effort and I had gotten too skinny. I ended up returning to the forger.
The Russians were approaching and the Germans decided to abandon Auschwitz. They wanted to dismantle the gas chambers to take all the Jews to their country and kill them there. The people who went in the gas chambers thought that the chambers were just showers. Right before going in, they got undressed in a separated room. When they entered the showers, the door would close and the lights would turn off. They all tried to escape and fight for their lives. However, they ended up being burnt in the ovens. When they didn't fit in the ovens, they were thrown in pits and sprinkled with naphtha. The end was close when we arrived at Gross Rosen, where we took a cattle train. It was suffocating in there, but I was able to build a kind of hammock with a blanket and a couple of hooks where I felt less overwhelmed. The train stopped for days. We had nothing to eat, nor a place to sit down and rest. The train was full of carcasses. They just opened the train for the bodies to be taken out. Then we got on the train, and it started moving. We got off the train again, and we were fed by the Red Cross. But we went back inside the train once more, on our way to Dachau. We were locked up in barracks, sitting on straw. The straw had lice, and the lice had typhus. I met a Frenchman who spoke English, and we both helped each other. A couple of weeks had passed when I got sick, with typhus. The other prisoners and I were sent to the Swiss frontier. This time we were treated much better. The war had ended, but instead of being freed, we were put into another train. When we got off, we didn't know where to go, and a patrol of the Wehrmacht took us to a lake. Miraculously, they didn't kill us. My friend Shivek, who I already knew before the war, and I stayed in the barn of an empty house. The Americans arrived. They let us stay and even gave us food. They were pleased I spoke English. We then had to go to Garmisch-Partenkirchen due to a refugee order. I was still ill, but it wasn't typhus. Back then, I didn't know I suffered from diabetes. We were finally given passports and arrived at Wurzburg, and then at Hanover. I went to Belsen, where I came across two girls I knew. They told me Anja was alive in Sosnowiec, as she had left Auschwitz before I did and survived thanks to Mansi's aid. About the rest of my family, they had all died except my brother Pinek, who was in Russia. One day, I sent Anja a photo so that she knew I had survived. I returned to Poland and finally saw Anja again. We traveled from Poland to Sweden in 1946 by plane. I was really excited to leave Poland. There, I worked as a refugee, and I finally came to North America, where I worked in a jeweler's.
5 years had passed since Vladek, my father, died of a heart attack. I published my book a year ago, and it has utterly been a success. I continue listening to my father's recording to finish Mouse.